Hey bums, Wade here. We record these episodes weeks and sometimes even months in advance, which allows us to produce them as safely and sustainably as possible and gives me time to edit them. Unfortunately, that means sometimes the information presented in them is outdated. The episode you're about to hear was recorded on November 21st, 2020. On December 1st, 2020, actually just a few hours after we published our Last Stand episode talking about him, the actor Elliot Page, who you will know from Juno, The Umbrella Academy, and Heavy Rain, came out as transgender and started using he, him, and they, them pronouns. All of us here at Cinema Bums are huge fans of Elliot Page for his work continually pushing the film and television industry forward, and for his work continually being good in these often awful X-Men movies. We had a lot of discussion internally about what to do with this episode, if we should re-record it in its entirety or edit out the sections where we talk about Elliot, who we love in this movie, and we decided rather to leave the audio in its original form, where you will hear incorrect pronouns and names attributed to Elliot. We apologize sincerely for that. We recommend that anyone who has questions about transgender life visit GLAAD at glaad.org, as well as, per Elliot's own recommendation, visiting and supporting TransAnta and the Trans Lifeline. You will also notice this episode is longer than usual. It was, in its unedited form, a whopping 3 hours long, so I have decided to make it a supersized New Year's special at a mere 2 hours. Rest assured, the podcast will be back to its normal 90 minutes next week. That's all. Thank you so much for listening. Happy New Year's, and please enjoy. Fresh out the oven, it's Cinema Bums. I'm Wade.
And I'm Emmett.
Cinema Bums is a podcast where we watch through every single movie in popular film franchises, one each week, to try and track how the storytelling changes over time. Today we are continuing our miniseries X23 about Fox's X-Men films. We will fully spoil today's film, but we will not spoil any future entries in the series. Emmett, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
I'm thankful to be here with you. Thankful for our podcast and for our listeners.
Oh, very
for
thankful.
sticking with us through another year. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be a good one. In part because today we are joined by a special guest. He is a musician, composer, and poet, perhaps best known to our audience for being the showrunner behind HBO Max's upcoming $100 million 6-episode miniseries talk show about famous C-list Batman villain the Condiment King, entitled Time to Relish and Catch Up. Please welcome Zane Hollomon.
Woo! Hello, thank you.
Thank you for being here.
It's a project I'm very passionate about.
How's it been?
It's been good.
Zane, what is your previous experience?
Are you experienced? My previous experience with these films. I have seen all of them except the New Mutants and Dark Phoenix, except the two most recent ones. Most of them I watched several years ago with our mother. We sat down and we watched them, and I thought they were like cool enough. I don't know. I was in would have been late middle school, early high school. I wasn't really thinking very critically about anything at that point. But I watched them, and recently, in light of this podcast happening, I went back and rewatched First Class in preparation for this. I'm sort of familiar with the comics. I've always been more into DC, but I've had a lot of friends who are really into them. And at one point, I tried to read Avengers vs. X-Men and got very bored very early on and stopped reading it. But I think I've read some stuff just sort of in the period where I didn't know objectivity in comics existed and just kind of got the first thing I saw at a con. So I've read some, and I've been thinking more about the series recently, but
Do you want to talk about that now?
I was thinking, because in preparation of the knowing I was going to be on this podcast, I was sort of like, oh, it's the X-Men movies. Like, cool, I guess I'll watch those. And it sort of wasn't more than that. Like, in my head, they're just kind of like B-rate superhero movies.
It's charitable.
But I was sort of thinking, and I kind of put together a lot of things from listening to a lot of podcasts and reading from a lot of storytellers. I sort of had this thought. I think there's what I describe as maybe an open secret about the X-Men series, which is that or maybe more of like a generational divide. Because for anyone like me who sort of grew up past the 90s and the 2000s, X-Men is like an old series. It's like a series that's kind of interesting and has some cool historical stuff, but it isn't the Avengers and it isn't like Batman. It isn't sort of the big cool superheroes that like we have movies about now. But for everyone who grew up in the 90s, it's like the most sort of foundational comic book. And I was thinking about this because X-Men, of course, didn't start in the 90s, started in, I think, the 50s was...
60s, but yeah.
Yeah, 60s. But the 90s saw sort of the animated TV show and an excellent run of the comics.
Yeah, the Claremont stuff is the 90s.
Yeah. And then going into the movie. The thing that's like different about the X-Men is they're sort of, I think, an interesting parallel to like the Fantastic Four, because they are like a family, sort of. Which is the cool thing about the Fantastic Four. But they're misfits, and they're kind of together just because they're similar and because they're like students together, not because they necessarily all like each other. You have this thing of like all of sort of the teenage school, like teen drama movie with the X-Men. And then you also have all of the idea of them being mutants and being sort of reviled by society and seen as different, and all of the metaphor for adolescence and the metaphor for the like queer metaphor that you've talked about. The thing that got me thinking about this is because every comic book writer that I really like now, whenever they talk about the books they grew up reading, they always say X-Men, and they only say X-Men. Like Tom King, Jeff Johns, Maddie Myers, who isn't a comic book writer, but I listen to her voice a lot on her podcast. Scott Snyder. Whenever you go on like any comic podcast and they talk about sort of current writers, they always say that they grew up like reading X-Men. And I think if you see the like big cultural events, right in the 90s you have Harry Potter, which is a school of like gifted individuals. More recently, there's even like My Hero Academia. I mean, more directly, there's like Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, which is just X-Men. And there's sort of this idea of like school of superheroes who people don't like, or who like society doesn't like, has, I think, become like almost a trope. Even more recently, Doom Patrol and like Umbrella Academy, which also Ellen Page in this movie in Umbrella Academy.
Oh, yeah.
Which is interesting. But I think Gerard Way is another person who talks about sort of growing up with the X-Men. But I think it's interesting because with this podcast, we've talked a lot about like the X-Men setting up the MCU, sort of being like walking so that the MCU could run. And in thinking about that, it's interesting thinking about the X-Men as just a series of comics and a series of characters, sort of setting up this idea, which I'm sure had been done before, but this idea of both like a school and mutants, or people who aren't liked by others, sort of setting up like the next 2 decades of kind of popular young adult storytelling.
Talked some about that, but I feel like that's a very eloquent kind of laying out of like all of the really valuable stuff about the comics, especially, and like their place. I don't know. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
It feels like a much clearer conversation about it than the ones that we've been having.
I think you're right that there is that generational divide, and that all of like the people who are 10 to 20 years older than us and are creating things right now are like really inspired by that run.
Also interesting bringing in the like Miss Peregrine and stuff like that, like things that are not like exactly superhero, but then like once you think about it, you're like, oh yeah, it is, like it's just like a steampunk superhero, or like it's superhero in a different skin or something.
Yeah.
Well, the thing about the X-Men too is that they're not just superheroes.
Right.
Like they have the superhero fighting aspect, and then they
Yeah.
also have like the school life,
Yeah.
high school dating aspect.
Yeah.
Which is like part of what really took off in the 90s too, with like the New Mutants, where it was like the X-Men have attitude now. And they're all dating each other.
Yeah.
You know, like that was like the big thing. Well, today we are talking about X-Men Days of Future Past. So this is the second film in the Decades quadrology, but it is also a sequel to the original trilogy.
And the Wolverine.
And the Wolverine. It takes place... What happens in this movie, to very briefly sum it up, is that in a dark... What happens in this movie is that
What does happen?
the furthest out in the timeline we have seen, things have gone very bad. The world is a complete dystopia. The remaining X-Men are on the run from Sentinels, and in order to stop this, they have to send Wolverine back to the past, to 1973, where he meets all of the actors from First Class, decade on from that. And so now we're in the 70s, and this is the 70s movie of the quadrology. And they have to stop the event that led to the creation of the Sentinels, after which, stop me if this sounds familiar, Wolverine has to go back to the future in order to discover that the change they made there changed a lot of things in the future.
I think that's a pretty succinct description of what happens. As far as
Was that joke in your notes? Did you prepare that?
It's not. It's not.
Wow.
off the cuff.
This film was directed by Bryan Singer. He's back after, in the interim, perhaps he's back. A shout of fear, as though this is
Just keeps coming.
the Nightmare on Elm Street Part 18.
Oh my god.
Part 16. In the interim, he directed Superman Returns, Valkyrie, and the complete garbage Jack the Giant Slayer.
I forgot about that.
Anyone
movie.
remember the
Featuring
film?
Ewan McGregor, right?
And Nicholas Hoult is the main character.
Oh yeah.
Nicholas Hoult of this movie.
How could I forget?
Valkyrie is a fantastic film.
Yeah, Valkyrie is really good. Superman Returns is fine. As fine as any of the other movies. Any of the other Bryan Singer movies. Written by Simon Kinberg, who we remember from co-writing The Last Stand. Music by John Ottman, back from X2. Running 2 hours and 11 minutes. A budget of $220 million, which means it would need about $440 million to break even for the studio. Boys, this thing made $746 million.
Oh yeah,
Wow.
baby.
This movie was a hit.
It was a hit.
Yeah.
It's the third highest grossing in the series. It is the highest X-Men movie by a lot. The top two are the two Deadpool films.
Oh my god.
That makes sense.
So this is like by far the most financially successful X-Men movie. I would say that it's the only X-Men movie, at least I would say it's the only modern X-Men movie that broke into the mainstream. Like the only movie after the original trilogy that was a part of like the actual mainstream, not just like people who like superhero movies.
This is actually one of my friends has told me that she had never seen any of the X-Men movies or any superhero movies, and this was the first one that she saw, just because it was, I guess, the most popular.
Yeah, looking at the numbers, a lot of people saw this who didn't see any other X-Men movies. I know we talk about a bunch of different mile markers for like how successful a film is. It's kind of so like breaking even or making a profit is like what was important to the studio. But I would say like in general, it's like $100 million is like when a movie sort of becomes real. Any superhero movie we're going to talk about is going to make $100 million. If it doesn't, then it's in gigantic trouble.
Right.
But now, post Avengers, we're in the era where it's like making $1 billion is when you become like a mega hit. Like anything like Avengers, Jurassic World, Star Wars, any like mega hit. Everyone is going to the movies to see this. You have to make $1 billion. And this is the closest any of these movies come to making $1 billion. It was also the highest budget in the series. It was just slightly ahead of The Last Stand and Dark Phoenix, which we haven't seen yet. It is also the second highest reviewed in the series.
Okay.
The highest reviewed is Logan,
All right.
which has a 77 on Metacritic. This movie has a 75 on Metacritic.
Hot dog.
Okay.
Compared to X2's 68 and First Class's 65.
Wow.
This is also
60.
the first movie in the series to be nominated for an Oscar.
Really?
For Best Visual Effects. It was released May 23rd, 2014.
All right.
Evan, any thoughts about the movies of 2014?
Yes, I have some thoughts about the movies of 2014. So, top grossing films of 2014. Transformers: Age of Extinction. I don't know which one that is. I feel like I've already said Transformers:
is
Age
that
of
the
Extinction.
cybernetic dinosaurs?
Probably.
I think they're
Oh, I
dinosaurs.
So
forgot
that's
there was
probably
one with
4.
dinosaurs.
Does that have Mark Wahlberg in it?
Sure. That's like the soft reboot, right?
It may be.
Or there's like Fallen Kingdom? Is that?
I thought that was.
I think that's one.
Jurassic
That's Jurassic World.
Isn't there also like there's one with
The
knights?
Last Night.
Yeah.
Transformers: Age of Extinction, which we think is probably a 4, maybe a 5.
Sorry, that was the highest grossing?
Highest gross.
Okay, so we must be doing worldwide.
Yeah, probably. The Hobbit: Battle of Five Armies.
Oh,
That's a number 3 of the adaptation of a single book.
But number 2 on the list?
Number 2 on the list. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just listen to this list for a second before you start freaking out, because it's wild.
you
Okay,
guys
so
can't
we got,
see Wade's face, but it is something to behold.
because it's the third one. Because it's the conclusion. Everybody has to see it.
Today, you could go outside and ask every person you see if they have seen a Hobbit movie, and they would all tell you no.
That's almost certainly true. But there's an element to that where they would be protecting their pride.
There's also, like, the Transformers is number 1 because it's big in China. Who was watching The Hobbit in China?
Maybe
How did it get to number 2?
maybe people in China really like the
Is it
Hobbit.
just because it was the Christmas movie?
It was a Christmas movie.
Whatever is
maybe.
in that Christmas slot is, like, always. We're also full on in 3D mode at this point.
Oh,
Which is a thing that has passed us by. This X-Men film was the first X-Men film to be filmed in 3D.
I may have
Okay.
seen it in 3D.
I probably did. I'm sure I saw The Hobbit in 3D.
Oh, God.
That's what made me
Yeah.
think
we
of that.
saw. I remember seeing that in IMAX 3D. I think the
It is.
weird frame rate too. Did the later ones? Was it just the first one that had the frame rate?
Oh,
thing?
It's just the second one, isn't it?
No, it's at least the first 2, if not all 3 of them, that have a really. Or you were talking about the Hobbits,
Yes,
right?
the
That have a really bizarre frame rate, and they jump between frame rates when they go to the one like
Yeah.
shot, and the one shot that's just very clearly a GoPro shot,
Right.
That they didn't do anything to color correct.
Yeah, they filmed the river sequence with the GoPro.
Yeah.
So
this is
obvious.
a Hobbit podcast.
This is
I
now a
just in
Hobbit.
case
We
the
have now-
audience doesn't know.
Just so you know, if you've never read The Hobbit, go read The Hobbit and never watch the films. Guardians of the Galaxy is number 3.
Wow.
A fantastic movie. You've
So
all
fantastic.
seen
Very
it,
good.
right? Okay.
We're going to talk about the superhero movies. I'm surprised that beat the other Marvel Cinematic Universe, though.
Yes.
And it must have been on word of mouth.
It must have been. It is certainly a more enjoyable movie than the
it
other
was-
MCU movie of this year. I mean, like, I think Winter Soldier is a good movie, but I don't think it's as good as Guardians of the Galaxy, or as fun to watch, or as much of anyone could watch this and like it. Next, number 4, Maleficent, which I believe. Okay, look. I believe
That is a movie that I know people like, but I'm still shocked that it's above other movies that came out this year.
Have you ever seen it?
No.
Have you ever
I've
seen
also
it?
never seen
Never seen it? I've never seen it. The Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 1 is in
okay.
number 5
Brutal.
slot.
Weird to think about Jennifer Lawrence giving these two performances in the same year. Because she feels so much older in that movie than she does in this.
In Mockingjay?
Yeah. Her performance in Mockingjay Part 1 is incredible. That movie is just, like, so brutal to watch. Like, it's, like, just nothing but a downer. That's the movie that starts and ends with her crying alone in a hallway.
And I think I've only seen that once, but that is, like, just the unpleasant parts of the third book, right? It's, like, just the misery parts of the third book. It's a good one. I don't know. I think those movies would be an interesting revisit now. especially because of like the whole point of why she wrote those books. Like the reasons why she wrote those books have gotten so much worse. But the movies that they made of the books may have helped contribute to the problem that the book was like addressing. So I don't know. I think there's a
real Fight Club situation.
That's true. Oh, interesting. In the number 6, we've got X-Men: Days of Future Past.
Okay.
Way to go.
Yeah, way to go. Right behind that, we've got Captain America: Winter Soldier. You've seen it?
Yeah, I've seen it. It's great. It's wild to me that it's this far down the list for what a seminal classic it is considered today. It's like high up there for me, but I know a lot of people consider it the best of the MCU. And it's just wild to me that it made less than Guardians and less than X-Men.
Yeah.
I guess it was like probably not a lot of people saw the first Captain America because it was a World War I Indiana Jones adventure, and it was before the actual Avengers came out, so people didn't really know. But I am surprised the Avengers bump could like push Iron Man 3 to like well over $1 billion in 2013, and yet couldn't get enough people out for that movie.
It does seem strange, especially, but I also think that this is one where, like, even though I like this movie, my generalized gripe about the MCU does like major apply here, which is that to get full appreciation of that film and like the big stuff that happens in that film, you have to have a working knowledge of the past couple films and like the general context, which you don't have to have, like I said, for Guardians of the Galaxy. You go into Guardians with zero context and it's still a great movie. You go into this with zero context and the hugest twist in maybe the whole MCU just doesn't really make sense. Like, it doesn't play to you very well. I speak from experience because when I saw this, I hadn't seen in almost any of the other MCU except for like the first Avengers. So I was like, okay. But like now thinking back to it, I'm like, oh no, that's like really big.
I mean, that's the exact same with this movie too.
Probably much worse in this movie. Because I think that movie at least sets up the basic sort of the role of the thing that gets changed.
Yeah.
Yeah, the twist to that movie applies to that movie. It just like has effects on everything you've seen before, but like the twist to this movie is the other movies. But it is wild. It is wild that in this year we have like the 2 superhero movies with the biggest twist that like change everything you've seen before.
Yeah.
I guess a difference is that this one is clearly a decision they made. Captain America one is one they were seeding throughout. But it is still.
Then we've got Dawn of Planet of the Apes.
Wow, is that that's 2
of the new run? I'm not sure.
That's not 3 because 3 came out on my birthday in 2017, which is why I remember it.
So it's probably 2.
It is 2. Our buddy Matt Reeves, off of Cloverfield, Let the Right One In. Now he's in the Batman hot seat.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah,
friend of the show, Matt Reeves.
Friend of the show, Matt Reeves.
We keep trying to get him on, but
got a busy schedule.
He said he's holding out for Popeye when we do the Popeye movies.
Okay, incredible. I hope we actually do the
when
Popeye
we do
movies.
Pod
Eye. Okay. Oh, don't get my hopes up for something that's not going to happen. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 comes in at number 9, which I believe is the second Andrew Garfield Spider-Man.
Yes.
That is correct.
And also the last Andrew Garfield Spider-Man.
I'm going to drop a little knowledge on you here.
Okay.
Mark Webb directed 500 Days of Summer for Fox and had a contract with them after that movie did good to like do his next movies with Fox. Then got brought over to Sony to do the 2 Amazing Spider-Man films because they were like, his name's Mark Webb. No one else in the business could possibly do it.
Right.
Michael Mann was busy. And so, in exchange for him breaking contract with Fox to move to Sony, at the end of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Sony had to make the post-credit scene a trailer for Days of Future Past.
Whoa.
The post-credit scene for The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is the scene in this movie where Mystique goes into like the Vietnam War bunker and then kicks all the guys' butts and then flies out.
That's super cool.
That scene
That's
is
interesting.
and even still on video release.
That's
That's the post-credit scene for that movie.
Number 10 is our buddy Christopher Nolan, friend of the pod, Christopher Nolan.
Friend of the pod.
With the movie Interstellar. You might have heard of it. It is the elusive non-sequential film in this list. It is the elusive movie which has no prequel nor no sequel. and is the only one on this list
Yeah.
to have that.
And isn't even really like that because the Nolan films are
Kind of a series.
The Nolan film is like, you know what to expect from this series, even though they're all independent from each other.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, they're selling the Christopher Nolan as the franchise.
They're selling
than the idea of the film.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, nobody was like, oh, let's go see the Matthew McConaughey Farmer film.
Right.
Or like, let's go see the new Christopher Nolan film.
Right. So this year had a couple of other big moments in film, and big moments for the Oscars being terrible. We've got Big Hero 6 wins the Oscar for Best Animated Film, which is a great movie.
Yeah.
It's an incredible film.
Another Marvel movie.
Another Marvel film. It beat the Lego movie.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which I don't even think was nominated, but was nominated for
wasn't.
awards in other things other than the Oscars. Like the Lego movie won Best at like BAFTA and other places or something. Like, but it is the thing that like won when the Lego movie very clearly like should have been nominated for Best Picture and won that for being like the greatest film of the whole year.
I agree. That is an incredible film, and it should have been nominated for Best Picture and Best Animated. It was nominated for Best Song and might have won that. Yes, I will not spoil the Lego movie. There is a reason that people cite as to why it was not nominated for Best Animated Film that I suppose could be true, but I think it's messed up that it wasn't nominated for Best Picture, whether or not it was eligible for animated.
Another thing that happened this year, another movie, I hesitate to use the word film. I do not think,
another series.
I do not think that friend of the pod Martin Scorsese would consider this to be cinema. The flick is Boyhood. The director is Linklater. And
You don't like Linklater?
I like one movie that the man has done.
Dazed and Confused?
No. Scanner Darkly. Which is actually I really like that movie.
I was going to say I hadn't seen any of his films, but I have seen Scanner Darkly.
But he got a ton of buzz for making what I think is truly the most boring film of all time. Mm-hmm. And a movie that is completely tone deaf. A movie that does not engage with any of the interesting things that it sets up for itself to engage with, and only gets just like into soppy sentimentalism and terrible acting because they did a bad job casting at the very beginning. I also think that all the interesting things about that movie you can see happen over the course of the Harry Potter series. If you just wanted to watch an actor grow up over the course of a bunch of film.
Oh, sure.
Luckily, it was beaten for Best by Birdman and the director Inarritu. Who won Best Director. Yeah. Which I don't think, I like Birdman okay. I was that year campaigning for anything but Boyhood.
I didn't know you felt so strongly.
Yes.
I like Whiplash a lot that came out that year.
Oh, that did also come out this year.
So from 11 to 14, I would tweet my year-end lists, and in 2018, I deleted my Twitter. Starting in 2015, I put them on Tumblr, and I also have them on my Letterboxd now.
Pizza Central.
So pre-2015, I can't remember what my movie of the year was, but I know that Whiplash was really high up there.
Whiplash is a great
film.
Movie.
Interesting film.
Zane.
Wait.
X-Men... Days of Future Past.
Oh, is that what we're talking about?
I feel like I saw that recently.
Flop or bop?
Oh, flop or bop? I think bop. I liked it. I enjoyed it. I went into this really excited because I remember the first time I saw this movie, I was just like in shock at the comic book stuff. Because I was like, Sentinels, that's crazy. Like I've seen those in books before. And then it being like a time travel sci-fi, like I guess not multiverse, but like sort of multiverse movie. And that was all stuff that I hadn't really seen in live action movies before as a kid, and that I was really excited about in comics. So I was super pumped the first time I saw it. I think this time I was maybe a little less excited just because I've seen all those things so much now on the screen. But I think it was still good. I think it's a well-crafted movie. I think I do still like First Class more having just rewatched it. But yeah, I would say bop.
Emmett, flop or bop?
He's done it again, baby. It's another bop.
The bad boy has done it again.
The bad boy has done it again.
Like
and
that.
let me just say, this is a perfect moment to talk about that, to like really engage with the uncomfortable issue that Bryan Singer has made another movie that we really like. So have y'all ever heard of a little thing called structuralist linguistics?
I think it's important that the audience know Emmett has asked this question at least 6 times in the last 24 hours.
So a little guy named Ferdinand de Saussure, I believe a Swiss linguist from the turn of the 20th century, basically came up with this idea that said that language is a complex of signs and symbols, and that the idea and the vocal, like the word or the vocal sounds that you use to make a word, are not intrinsically linked with each other. They're only tenuously connected, and they affect each other, but they also don't exist apart from each other. Like, there's nothing about the word chair that is essentially chairness, as is demonstrated by the fact that multiple different languages have different sounds,
right?
And symbol structures. We assign meaning to words.
Okay.
But you also we also couldn't think about chairness without the word for it. Like, it wouldn't be a separate thought from other things without language to separate it. All right? So you need to know this to understand a little guy named Roland Barthes, who is like, this decenters basically authorship. I'm not going to walk you through the whole path of how he gets to that conclusion, but he says this decenters authorship. We always, in classical criticism, we have thought of the author as being the final explanation and the final signifier, or this final signified of the signifier of art. So that we say that anything that we are trying to understand in a work of art, we can ultimately understand by knowing the biographical information about the artist.
Right.
And he says no, the author is not a person. Like, the author doesn't exist as a person independent of the work. The author and the work are created at the same time. There's an authorial voice that is created for the sake of the work that then is like only there for the duration of the work itself. And he says that all of the work takes, like, all of the meaning that happens in a work of art takes place in the mind of the receiver, takes place in the sensory and in the mind apparatus.
Right. Your
of the
experience
person.
of
Your experience
the movie
of the art
happens based
so
on
you
how
can't
experience
pierce through a work of art to see the creator. There is no creator. There's only the art and you. And this is really interesting if you think about, like, Shakespeare's plays. People are always trying to find new biographical information about Shakespeare to further understand and, like, really get Shakespeare's plays. But his argument would be, like, you get Shakespeare's plays by reading them and experiencing them. You don't have to know anything about the man to know your experience of the work. That is something that I offer as a way around liking work by problematic authors. The work itself stands on its own. Now, I still don't think that means that you, like, forgive the person, and I still don't think that means that you let that person continue to make work and profit off of it. I think the studios consistently saw things that Bryan Singer was doing and saying, that's not a deal breaker for us, we will still hire this guy. And I think those were moral failings on their part. But I think us watching the movie and enjoying it is not inherently wrong because of this idea here.
Yeah, I think I like that. You are right in your introduction off air that is purely semantic. Because I think there are, like, lots of sides to that, and I think maybe the more common side of why it's upsetting to like something like this isn't the moral quandary of just the fact that a person who did bad things made it, but the fact that you are directly supporting that person by exchanging money for it, by, like, giving that person your money, which this doesn't address. And also, I think with the Shakespeare thing, because, like, that is, I think maybe there are just a lot of different different sides to it. Like, I think it's interesting to learn things about Shakespeare, to learn sort of why he wrote the way he did, but maybe not necessarily the actual meaning of the work as an isolated piece of fiction, but just the meaning of the work as a piece of history in his life. So I think maybe we have not solved the problem.
And I think it's not just money you're giving, but also like your time and your opinion.
Yeah.
Like part of the whole guilt you're talking about is the guilt that is connected to you. That you are the person who is engaging with the material.
Right.
Because it's like you are the person who is being like, Bryan Singer's films are good, actually, when nobody wants to talk about Bryan Singer. Like, everyone knows what he did is horrible. Like, you are the person being like, The Cosby Show is actually really good. And, like, that may be true, but you're the one saying it. Like, you're the one making the argument for engaging with the work by this horrible person. And I think that's what makes the, like, guilt of actions that you didn't have any involvement in whatsoever feel personal.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, wait. Flop or bop?
I think it's a bop. This was my favorite one when I first saw it. I think looking at it now, it is so much poorer directed than First Class. Like, the movie making on display here is pretty much garbage. But I think the ambitions that it has and the performances in it, like, there are, like...
Some great performances.
3 unbelievably good performances and then, like, 10 awesome performances in this. And I think that that is elevating the material so much. I also think that, like, the third act of this comes together. Like, all of First Class is good to me, and in this one, it, like, kicks in at the end and ties everything together in a way I like.
Yeah.
There's, interestingly, like, a decent amount of retreading of X2, since this is the first film that Bryan Singer has done since X2. Like, there are a couple sister scenes we get. But yeah, I'm in agreement that it is a bop. Zane, you said you liked it more than First Class. Or, excuse me, you said you liked First Class better.
Yes.
I think I agree with you. Emmett, how did you feel?
I feel like, I don't know, I would rather watch this movie than First Class. First Class feels like, I think First Class is a good movie, but I feel like this movie, like, checks all the X-Men boxes. And I think that's what I like about it. Like, you get, except for the Danger Room, you get everything that you could want from the X-Men. You get mutants working as a team. You get good mutants and bad mutants working as teams in this, in, like, really compelling, cool fight sequences that are more than just punching. Like, and actually using their powers in inventive and cool sorts of ways.
Yeah.
Both in, like, the military scene where Mystique breaks them out, and then through the beginning and end fights that they have, like, protecting around Logan. It's interesting with, like, Wolverine as, like, his power is basically being able to punch harder than most other superheroes, which I guess is, or, like, and take more punches than most other superheroes. But, like, all of the other X-Men have way more interesting powers than he does, at least, like, for battle sequences, I think. So, like, I really like that. And I think this is a movie that, like, often fools you into thinking that it's a much better movie than it is. And I think that the Vietnam stuff plays into that. I think it is using the cultural attaché of, like, being a movie about the Vietnam War without ever engaging in any of the stuff about the Vietnam War. It uses that as the background and as, like, the catalyst, but none of it is, like, I don't know. It's
not in the forefront.
It's not in the forefront. It's, like, interesting that that's going on, but they never really never dig in, but it's like he wants it to feel like a Vietnam movie without actually doing any of the hard work of making it a Vietnam movie. Much like he wants it to be a movie about addiction without doing the hard work of making it a movie about addiction. I think all, like, the imagery of the needle and, like Professor X as a junkie is there, but the hard work of what that, like, actually is not present in the film. I feel like, I think James McAvoy is, again, like, this is how you get fooled into thinking that it's better than it is. Like, McAvoy is doing very good work in those scenes, but it's just, it all feels like kind of rushed and, like, not deeply engaging in that in those like in substances that like are things that have more substance than just the X-Men, that he like brings in as set decoration rather than as like core tenets of the plot, if that makes sense.
It's like Back to the Future 1 is like a movie about your family, and Back to the Future 2 is a movie about time travel. Like this is I feel like a movie about time travel.
Yeah.
As opposed to specifically about the relationships.
It's like a movie about the X-Men franchise. Simon Kinberg said when he sat down to write this, like, the main issue I'm trying to solve is, like, what happens in the X-Men movies now?
The Cars 3 of X-Men movies.
Would you like to elaborate on that comment?
That's what the Cars 3 writers said about the Cars 3, is that it's about the state of Cars movies.
Oh, it is. That movie is weirdly meta.
Yeah.
But it's also by far the best Cars movie.
It's also secretly about eugenics.
That's Cars 2.
Just kidding. I'm so sorry. Okay, can we talk about this movie for a second?
I'd love to.
It opens. Okay, I don't know. This opens with the mutant Holocaust, which I think is an interesting callback to both First Class and the original X-Men movie, which opened with the real Holocaust.
Yeah, it just kind of have the same shot of like the crowd of people while walking.
Yeah. And it's interesting, but I also feel like I don't know how that opening is like. I mean, it's very dark. It definitely sets the tone, but it's also like knowing what territory the X-Men have played in before, it seems that does seem like flippant in a way that you asked earlier if the other usages of that were, and I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like that's the hard dichotomy of X-Men. It didn't feel that way to me. But the hard thing is we know that it's based on real life struggles, but it is telling fictional stories about it.
Yeah.
Right? So that's always the tough thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It also, it is the mutant Holocaust, but it reads more just like the end of the world. Like it doesn't really read like two sides with opposing ideals. I mean, you start with the camera going through, like, I believe, Empire State Building, which has a giant hole in it.
Yeah.
It just feels like there are, like, machines that have taken over, not really, like, a war of ideals or of, like, race.
Yeah.
Or
this
religion.
Also takes place in 2023, which is the same year that another time travel movie, Avengers Endgame, takes place, where we see a world depicted that lost 50% of its population. And this world is clearly like leagues worse.
Yeah.
Like this looks like a world where, I mean, it looks like Terminator. Like it looks like a world where robots have taken over and everything is horrible for everyone everywhere.
Yeah.
This is 10 years after the end of the Wolverine, which was previously the furthest out in the timeline we had seen.
Okay.
In those 10 years, Wolverine got metal put back into not his whole body, but just his claws. 10 years ago, the professor and Eric they knew that this was coming. Because that's when they come to Wolverine and they're like, something really bad is happening. It's not just about mutants, about the whole world. You need to come with us.
And they've been doing this for 10 years now?
And then it's 10 years from that, which is like a functioning society, to this.
Yeah.
This is also kind of like the Avengers event movie of the X-Men. And they did it real quick, but it's kind of it's like they had the two series and they were like, let's bring them together.
Bring them all together.
Let's do the event movie where the people from the different series you like are like now in the same one and working together.
Yeah. Wait, I have timeline stuff. When does X-Men 2000 in like continuity? When does that take place?
2000.
Oh, it's just in the year.
Okay.
So in X-Men 2000, the Sentinels have been around for 30 years?
Well,
no. Okay, so as I understand from the plot of this film,
in 2006, they're training against the Sentinel in the Danger Room.
They're training against a classic, much more classic-looking Sentinel.
Yeah.
These are like the special Mystique Sentinels that can change shape to adapt.
Right.
And I feel like that's an advance, for much farther advanced than the ones that we see in like the 1973 scenes in this movie. So
yeah, and the 70s ones are closer to the ones you've seen in 2006.
Yeah.
I think that we're supposed to assume that somewhere around 13 is when Trask Industries or whoever figured out like how to make the elite Mystique Sentinels we see at the end, because those are the ones too that can like take on any mutant power.
Yeah.
Which is a power the old
Right.
ones don't have.
Yeah.
So I think that we're supposed to assume that it took them a long time to figure it out. It's like how they had the plans for the Death Star and Attack of the Clones, and then it took them 23 years to build it.
Yeah,
And then it took
sure.
them 2 days to build a second, most of a second.
Yeah,
one.
that's true. That's true. But the hard thing is the first, you know?
Yeah.
We know that. The only podcast that was hard to do was the first episode.
Yeah, absolutely. The rest is
we are killing this hour-long podcast about The Hobbit.
The dissolution of this podcast.
I really think that Stephen Fry is putting in great work in this movie.
What is that a joke about?
About The Hobbit.
Oh.
The movie that we're
The
talking about.
memorable movie, The Hobbit.
Oh.
One of the Hobbits, anyway.
Okay, it smells like we've stepped into the continuity corner.
Yeah, it really does. It
Or
really
as
does.
I looking around this place, it seems like it's been expanded to the continuity condo now.
I mean, really, because now that's like the conversation about this movie. But I mean, in what you say about the whole, like, this is a movie that's about the X-Men movies.
Yeah.
Like, how do they work?
Yeah.
The question of the X-Men movies is how the hell does any of this continuity work?
Yeah.
We've been teased on Magneto and Professor X coming back since 2006.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like we've been waiting around for at that point 8 years to like know what the hell happens after X3. Well, I'm just saying you get a taste of it in the Wolverine, and then nothing more.
It is pretty wild that they got like everyone back for this.
Yeah.
Like being 8 years later, like they got Kelsey Grammer back to put on that Beast makeup to make that dad joke. They got the dude
Best
who
part
played
of the movie.
Colossus back. Like you could have gotten anyone in the world to do that,
Anyone.
and he came in and did it. Like
Sean Ashmore.
yeah, with the beard. Let's before we look around this continuity condo, we should talk about, as Zane mentioned, the hot boy summer of this movie. Because you've got a lot. You've got Sean Ashmore with the beard, with the daddy energy now. You've got
Bucket hat. There's a bucket hat.
You've got Nicholas Hoult, who I did not find attractive. Sorry to Anna in the last one, but in this one he does have the little bucket hat, and he's got
That
the
cute
stripe.
jacket.
He's got the striped
Little
vest
rainbow
jacket.
fanny pack.
I feel like not being in the yellow spandex is really great for him.
Magneto has the hat when he
Yeah,
not the metal hat, but
he has
just
the old man hat he always wears in the originals.
the old man hat.
the like fedora-esque.
It's pretty good. You've got Professor X with longer hair,
Yeah.
pretty disheveled.
Fassbender is very hot in this. In the scene where it's him and Mystique in the phone book, and he's like, "We haven't been this close in quite a while."
Which is also her about to murder him.
I believe that that's how that man would act in that situation. That did not read as out of character to
I
me.
agree.
Even William Stryker.
Sure.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
like, I know he is kind of the villain.
He's got that. He's got that smirk.
You've got Jackman, who is by far the most jacked we've seen him. He's
yeah.
just. We do see his butt in the only bit of nudity that's not censored on Disney Plus.
Yeah, go watch it before they find out.
Listen to their weekly episode of this podcast.
You can see Hugh Jackman's ass.
Yeah, he's also. I don't think we've mentioned him yet. He's really good in this.
Yeah, he is.
He is
Despite
excellent.
not being good for a few of these in a row,
The-
he is like back.
The look that he and Professor X share right at the end when they realize what has just happened and sort of both like communicate silently that everything is fine and that they did it is just like I was almost in tears watching that.
Yeah. Yeah, so the ending to this movie, let's work through this together, lads. The ending to this movie is that by stopping... Okay.
Okay. You need some help? You need some
I'm
help
trying
in the
to think of how
condo?
to, like,
Get lost in the dining
succinctly-
room?
Okay. So there is a timeline, a single timeline of all the movies we've seen so far, right?
Yes.
And we've been tracking things on that timeline.
Yes.
What year they take place.
Yes.
How the character arcs happen.
Yes.
in this film, we hear that on that timeline, in 1973, Mystique killed Boulevard Trask, played excellently by Peter Dinklage in this film, seemingly unrelated to the Trask we see as the head of the national security in X-Men The Last Stand. Mm-hmm. She killed Boulevard Trask in 1973 at the Paris Peace Accords, which led to the creation of the Sentinel program, which led to the world being destroyed.
Yes.
So they go back and successfully, in the nick of time, stop Mystique from killing Trask. Mm-hmm. And then when Wolverine returns to 2023, he finds that everything is different. So characters that have died in the past and stayed dead are now back. The status quo has changed. Mm-hmm. So
He's a teacher.
He's a teacher. Are we in agreement that this is creating a new second timeline?
A second that erases and replaces the first, right?
Yes. So the first one is now kind of like memorialized. Like, we remember everything that happened there, and so does Wolverine.
But no one else does.
No one else does.
Yes, but now there is a second one.
Yeah, it's a closed loop time travel, I believe is the term for it. The same thing as, like, Back to the Future. Because that other world, like, no one can go back to the first timeline. Unless you were to go back in time and make a new timeline that was somehow identical to it.
So, are you saying that means no future movies in this series could be set in the first timeline? That timeline ceases to exist.
Yes. It's like one line.
Okay.
And then you go back to a point on the line. And when you go back, because Ellen Page like explains this at one point early on, also in the movie. They go back to that point, and then until the whole time Wolverine is asleep, both are sort of happening at once, and it's two concurrent ones. But
right.
when he wakes up...
The cat's in the box, and you don't know if it's alive or dead, and then he wakes up.
When he wakes up, none of the first timeline exists anymore. It's all gone, and everything just goes on from the second altered one.
Okay. So what do we know about this new timeline? Do we think that First Class happened in this timeline as well?
Yes, because First Class
happens before the events of 1973.
Okay. So
First Class still happens, and the movies that happen after this in the Decades quadrilogy are now on the new timeline, occurring after the events of 1973 in this film. What's confusing me right now thinking about this is that Wolverine wakes back up in 2023, but according to the logic of this, he was never sent back. He wouldn't wake up in 2023 and not know what the hell was going on. He would just have always known what was going on in that timeline.
They do explain that. It works the same way in the Zero Escape game series. Because they talk about it's not him being sent back, it's his consciousness from 2023 inhabiting his younger body. So his consciousness goes back, and then it comes back, but it doesn't inherit what happened until then, which is why he still has the gap.
So does he have double consciousness now?
There is an unaccounted for consciousness of the version of him that went from that point where he was in the river to now. They try to explain the whole time travel at the beginning when all of the young mutants are playing The Binding of Isaac, when they're all doing the roguelite thing, because they say the thing happens, and then Sentinels come and kill them all, and then they send one person back, and then when he warns them, that no longer happened. And so, like, he knows, but none of the other ones sort of know.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah.
Although that is also because he dies in the new timeline, so I guess his consciousness doesn't go back, because he doesn't wake up. It doesn't have anywhere to go back to. Do you this is confusing me now.
Wolverine?
No, in at the very beginning when they're explaining how they're avoiding the Sentinels.
Oh, right. They send Bishop back. And then
Bishop warns them, and then that no longer happens.
Yes.
But the difference between how that works and how it works later with Wolverine is Bishop doesn't have a body to go back to wake up in. because Wolverine goes back and then he wakes up and then his consciousness comes back to 2023 and he sort of doesn't. His consciousness comes back, but Bishop never returns because he has died.
This is what I would speculate happened.
Okay.
I would speculate that she sent Ellen Page, Kitty Pryde, sends Bishop's consciousness back to an earlier moment. So we're in an earlier moment. All of that team is at the dinner table. Bishop is his normal self. Then, all of a sudden, he's possessed by his consciousness from the future. He says, they're going to get us. They're going to kill us.
Don't go to this spot.
Yeah, don't do this. Then that consciousness gets set back,
and
he turns
dead.
into his self that he was 30 seconds before he was inhibited, probably not remembering what happened. Everyone else is like, you just told us what happened. His consciousness goes back to the room and then gets murdered.
Right.
So that version of him gets murdered.
They're accounted for by just dying.
And
then
they
the
make
younger
a new
version
timeline.
comes back. Okay,
also, here's a question.
Okay.
If
what?
If Wolverine in the present, while he was being beamed back, would have been killed, would then he have just stopped inhabiting the past, and the past version of him would have
woken up with the gap from the last
forgetting
several
the last-
days.
Not knowing what the hell is going on, which is kind of what happens in the middle when he has the weird, like...
Oh,
flash,
right.
and he's
Yeah.
like-
Oh, yeah. Right, that does happen.
Yeah.
Forgot that happened.
Yeah.
So, yes, I
Now
guess.
wait. Is that what we're seeing? Is that 1973 Wolverine is briefly there, and then 2023 Wolverine
he
comes back?
Yeah, exactly. That's why
I
he's
thought it
so
was
wigged out.
2023 Wolverine is just confused.
No, I think 1973 Wolverine is back for a second
Okay.
and is like, who the hell is... What is any of this?
That does kind of make
That
sense.
would kind of make sense, that 2023 Wolverine is like somewhere in the stream between the two, and then he like gets back in. So the things we have seen in this timeline going forward. We've seen First Class. We've seen this movie in 1973. It ends in 1973.
Yes.
And then we've seen that they end up in 2023 like those characters.
Yes.
Like, all of the characters who we see in 2023 live until that point. They end up looking like those characters. But everything that happened in those middle 50 years we're unsure of.
Unsure of.
All we know is that Wolverine on the plane gave Professor X a one-sentence synopsis of the X1 through 3, saying, go make a school, remember these three characters.
He does have the if you have a son named Marty and he
Yeah.
messes up the couch, don't be too hard on him.
Yeah, and then going off of that information alone and like his own pre-existing motivations, Professor X like forms the school, and things end up similar to how they were.
But he had already formed the school in First Class, so
but,
he
like,
just like brings it back,
forms
and
that version
that
of the school.
class.
Yeah.
The second class.
Okay, I think we've wrapped it up. It was different.
We have not wrapped up the continuity thing. Oh, we wrapped
It
up
was
that
different
part.
than I was thinking in my head how the timelines work. But that does clear it up.
Okay, now let's get into a couple other questions about timeline stuff.
Okay.
Because there are a couple outstanding ones.
Sure.
If Wolverine is taken by Stryker, but that Stryker is actually Mystique at the end of this movie, does that mean that Wolverine never gets metal implants?
Well, I would say
sure.
at this point we're not sure because we don't see him
we don't
use
know.
his metal in 2023. We don't know. I would assume that's set up for the sequels, that we're going to see what Mystique does with Wolverine now that she's Stryker.
All right, another thing. And this might be a thing for all the quadrilogy.
Okay.
10 years?
10 years.
Between...
Okay. Do you want to know?
Yeah, I want to know.
I've got the list.
Okay, sweet.
Wade's
X-Men
hand is in the air.
happens in 1944, the prologue.
Okay.
And then the action takes place in 2000.
Okay.
X2, 2003, question mark. Last Stand, 2006, question mark. That's the furthest out it could be.
Okay.
It could be before that. In The Last Stand, we see 1986 as Jean Grey. Now, all of these things are irrelevant. Completely irrelevant in the new timeline.
Yes.
In Origins, which is okay.
Don't look at
okay,
me.
let's look at the dates. In Origins, we see Troye Sivan in 1845. Then in 1973, the same year that this movie takes place, Wolverine is
presumably after, because this is in January.
Well, let's work through that.
Okay.
Wolverine and Sabretooth are put on trial for attempted rape of a woman in Vietnam.
In Cambodia, though, I think.
Then Stryker enlists them into his gang of superheroes who fight crime. Then the bulk of that movie takes place in 1979, 6 years after this movie.
Okay.
The Wolverine is in 2011. The post-credit scene is in 2013.
But at least the 1979 stuff of the Wolverine Origins movie
That doesn't happen. That's irrelevant.
Okay.
Correct.
And First Class takes place in 1962. So the characters in this movie are 11 years older than they were in First Class.
Okay.
Yes.
So how old do we think... The professor was definitely very young. Like, I think the professor was like early 20s at most.
In what? In
First Class.
He's in college.
Yeah, he is in college. Although, that's a master's, I think. Because they read it as a master's dissertation in this one. But let's say he's 24.
Okay.
Charitably.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
So he would be 35 in this.
Okay.
Fassbender, we see him as, what, a 10-year-old in 44?
Sure. Let's
So
call it.
he'd be 40, about 40 in this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I buy it.
Mystique?
Mystique's special changing ability gives her an ability to look younger or look whatever age she wants.
There's a catch-all there.
There's a catch-all there, so we can.
Because even in First Class, she becomes older Jennifer Lawrence when she's in bed with Fassbender.
She becomes Rebecca Romijn, who played her in the originals.
Right.
So
Okay.
there's a catch-all for her. But, but Nicholas Hoult does not look.
How old would he have been? What, 25? He's 35 in this?
Well, he would have been. Isn't he even younger in that? Isn't he?
He's a working scientist, isn't he?
Oh, is he?
Like they come to him at a lab or something?
Yeah, he's
Oh,
working
okay.
for the government.
Okay, then
I mean, he could be early 20s too.
So he's probably mid 30s.
But they're
anyway.
mid 30s.
That's the one that I'm do we really believe it? Because he still looks very much like he's in his 20s.
Mystique was the one where I'm do I believe it? But I guess she does have the out of that power. Okay.
Who else do we have? I guess that's it.
That's pretty much it, right? They write off a bunch of the First Class characters. I don't know how we feel about that. A Banshee, an Angel.
Yeah.
Havoc is
in this movie. Also doesn't look like he's aged 10 years.
11 years.
11 years. How old was he? We think he was maybe 15, 16.
Yeah,
do you think,
16.
Do we really think he's 27 in this
here.
movie? He looks like he's in his early 20s at the oldest.
So let's work out. Wait.
Okay, I don't like that one.
The first question is, do we need to work out this and the Wolverine, or is that invalidated because of the new timeline?
Yeah, the Wolverine is completely toast. It doesn't happen.
Yeah, the 79 stuff. But what about the 73 stuff?
That
It's invalidated going forward, but was it still valid when he transported back there?
it's
Right.
also problematic because get this, it's January 1973.
Well, you know what?
we have a hard date for when this movie
That
happens.
maybe works.
Which
Let's
we should say why, because we had that conversation off air.
Oh, yeah. So it's because this takes place around the Paris Accords, which is the official end of U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War.
Yes, which was in January 1973.
January 1973, that's the event that Mystique is going to kill Trask at.
Oh, but it doesn't.
What?
Because I was thinking it worked, because if this is in January, he could go to the war, be discharged, and join the team within that year. That's plausible that he would join the war after this. But this movie starts with the end of the war.
Yeah. But I'm saying that what happened was in Cambodia in the part of the war that was I said the official end of U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. Not I feel like he was probably involved in the nastiest stuff of it, right? But the big question is, where's Sabretooth? He and Sabretooth are buddy-buddy all through out until the mid-70s.
Sabretooth is at a table waiting for Wolverine to meet him for lunch the whole movie. They're best buds.
They
They're
are.
best buds. He gets
They
transported
are.
back. He's forgotten about it. He was just having a nice time with the lady. He wakes up. He was supposed to go meet Sabretooth, and now he's forgotten.
Dude, that's
Sabretooth
why
is
Sabretooth
right off screen.
is so pissed at Wolverine the whole time in the 1979 timeline.
That's why.
He's like, bro, you missed our launch date. We did that every Wednesday.
Okay.
night.
Well, I think we've solved it.
Okay.
Is there anything else in the continuity condo we need to talk about?
Nah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I feel
let's-
good.
let's-
This condominium has passed its prime.
Okay, this is inspired by, based on
Uh-huh.
a run of the comics.
Uh-huh.
The 1981 two-issue run, Days
Uh-huh.
of Future Past, by
Uh-huh.
Chris Claremont and John Byrne, which is where Kitty Pryde goes back in time to her younger self to stop Mystique from assassinating Senator Richard Kelly.
And it's Kitty Pryde who goes back in time using the same power, and then it's her and Wolverine are like the two big characters. And like she goes back and finds Wolverine, and I think together they stop the thing from happening. And again, she goes back at the end of that series. She goes back, her consciousness goes back to the future, but we stay with all of the people in the 1980 timeline. For them, it's like 1980 and 2013 is the difference. The other thing is, in the comics, the 1980 was the contemporary timeline. So they weren't going,
It was someone from the future.
it's someone
coming
from the
back
future
to-
is coming
Oh.
back, and all the X-Men are like, whoa, wild.
Interesting.
And then she goes back, and at the end, we stay in the 80s on that like mainline run, and the X-Men are not sure if they have prevented the thing or if they've only like postponed the catalyzing event for the thing, as opposed to this movie, which kind of like solves that problem, but maybe, as we just discussed, creates a bunch more continuity problems by doing it.
Fundamentally different types of stories.
Zane, you said you brought a gift?
I do have a surprise. So this is, I'm very excited about this. Wait is perhaps not. So we have been going through our basement lately at home.
Oh, no.
And we have
Oh,
lots of exciting things from Wade's childhood. Wade, one half of the Cinema Bums. And in it, I'm just gonna pull it out here.
I've never been more struck with
composition.
This
book,
is literally my worst nightmare.
which I want. we got to post this on the social media, but I want the audience to know it's like a classic composition book from like middle school, and on the name line it says Wade Hollomon, and subject it has first it has in pen written and then crossed out X-Men. Immediately beside it, it has written and then also crossed out silly songs. And then to the right of it, it has Wade written in pencil. And this, I haven't looked at it too extensively, but I believe it was the beginning of a fanzine that Wade started to write about X-Men. There's some Spy Kids in here too, which is Wade and our cousins fighting evil. And there's lots of art in here, which is really what I think is good. Here we have X2 Volume 1, Wolverine's Revenge. Just the beginning of a little comic here that Wade started. And I believe there are some X-Men sketches throughout here. X3, X-Boys, official movie magazine. Would you look at that? We have the
Who is that? Is that Darth Maul on the cover?
I believe so.
Oh my god.
There's endless joy in here. It says, your world, your rules, your way. 3,000 Pokemon cards. There's so much more in here that X2 Wolverine's Revenge. Let's just share with the class.
That looks like Wolverine.
That looks like Wolverine. So I wanted to mention this in light of sort of, Professor Xavier. Look at
That's
that. Look at
definitely
that.
Professor
Wow,
X.
nice.
Real name
Yeah.
Charles. We've got some stats on all the characters. Wolverine, that's pretty good.
Oh, that's really good.
Oh, that's so good.
That is pretty
He's
good.
so hairy.
That's the one that's going on the Instagram.
Yeah, we should use that as the you should change the art for the podcast. I think. Just in light of talking about how the series has affected us, I wanted to bring some tie to Wade's past and these movies.
I do not know how my box of journals made it to the basement, but I'm literally every day I wake up in a cold sweat thinking about you all pouring over them.
Well, maybe you've come full circle now, because you were making the official X-Men magazine, and now you're producing the official X-Men podcast.
That's right. That's right. Fox has got us on the payroll, baby. We called them. We said, we heard about the Disney deal. What does that mean? They said the podcast is still on, boys.
So I have... Wait a second, because I still have great notes on
Emmett
this.
has pages and pages to go through.
Okay, just a quick rundown on some of my notes here that are not like important but are interesting.
Is any of
Emmett
this
just
important?
described what he's about to read as not important but interesting to me.
I don't know. Isn't that like the whole podcast, as Zane just said? Okay, they look like Super Bowl robots. The Sentinels in this, not like the new scary Sentinels, but the 1973 Sentinels look like the robots from the Super Bowl commercials.
There are robots
I am
at the
unfamiliar
Super
with
Bowl?
this.
Okay,
I thought perhaps they were an older design of the Sentinels.
they look like that, but they also look a lot like the Super Bowl robots. And I only thought about that because he picks up a whole football field.
What do you mean?
What are the Super Bowl
Look up the
robots?
Super Bowl robots. You will get an image
Do
immediately.
they play football?
Yes, they do. They play.
Oh wait, I maybe know like in coming out of the ads.
Yeah,
and they play
coming
the
into the ad-
theme,
yeah,
like the horn
exactly.
theme. Oh, I do know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Also, Magneto hates
These?
Yes. I wanted to mention that the Paris Accords full name, Agreement on Ending the War and Restoring Peace in Vietnam, which also sounds to me like a Fiona Apple title.
Oh, that was pretty funny. That was pretty funny, Emmett.
Thank you. Also, the peace accords, they were negotiated by Henry Kissinger, and from the North Vietnamese side, Le Dec Tho, I believe is how you pronounce the name. And I did look it up, but that was an hour and a half ago at least. The two of them were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Le Dec Tho, he did not accept it. Henry Kissinger accepted the Nobel Peace Prize, and many people say that is when satire died, because he, like, nothing could be more satirical than the man who got us into Vietnam and, like, killed just so many innocent people are dead because of him. He won the Nobel Peace Prize. So a lot of people think that that's kind of like the end of satire, which is interesting because I don't think SNL heard about that. This is something that I meant to say when we were talking about the comics. The name of the comics, which we have talked about, like Days of Future Past being kind of a weird name.
Yes.
Guys, this is my favorite thing and the thing that I've been saving. It comes from the name of a 1967 Moody Blues album called Days of Future Past with the SSED as opposed to past with a hard T.
Oh, okay.
Which features the iconic song Nights in White Satin, which, if you've never heard it, listeners of the podcast, I urge you to turn off the podcast immediately and go listen to that song and then come back and finish the podcast.
It's too late. You said immediately. They don't know what to do. They just turned it off immediately.
They were just like, okay.
A loyal listener.
Well, it's incredible. I don't know. It's just.
Is there any thematic connection, or is it just they like
it's
the
just
record?
that John Byrne was like, oh, that's a cool name. Yeah.
There's
That's
plenty
interesting.
of history of that. I think just this last year, Joss Whedon wrote X-Men WAP.
You're fired from the podcast.
Too late. The Fox check already cleared. What should we even talk about?
Yeah, what is
Okay. All right.
The DNA opening is back.
DNA opening is
Bryan
back.
Singer has brought the DNA opening back with him.
It also
Was this
returns.
movie really a bop? That is a good question.
It was like on the bar for me.
Here's a question.
Yeah.
Here's a question. Who's the protagonist of this film?
Oh, that is a good
I was
question.
thinking about that.
Damn near impossible to say.
So the person we follow most consistently is Wolverine. The two people whose character arcs we are most interested in are Professor X and Mystique.
And when you say we are, you mean the plot.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Mystique is maybe more enticing because Professor X, we know how it ends up. We know he ends up as Professor X. Mystique, we are trying to change her, what happens.
Right.
Going into this, I was thinking like, oh, I think Mystique is the protagonist of this movie, going off my memory of it. And then watching it, I was like, oh, she's in 18 minutes of this movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's not in this thing.
No.
So it can't be her. If it's Wolverine, he is once again a protagonist with no agency.
Yeah.
He is like once again a protagonist not doing
Yeah.
anything that he wants to do.
Well, Wolverine also serves as the audience surrogate in this film. He's the one who is like reacting to things, who doesn't know things, who is sort of serving as like being the audience surrogate, which is, I don't know if that makes him definitely not the protagonist. I don't know if that would factor into that discussion at all.
It could
it is
be
interesting.
McAvoy. So the question we ask is like, who makes the change at the end?
And it's McAvoy.
That's complicit along with who is the protagonist.
yeah.
McAvoy makes the choice to not control Mystique. He makes the choice to let Mystique make the choice, which is different than what he had done before.
And is intimately related with like his character arc of the past two movies. If we were to say that he is that Professor X is the protagonist,
Sure.
it's about him becoming the professor. Because before that, he was Charles, who had like a cool idea and wanted to make a school for mutants, but it was like his thing. And like the truth of like being a teacher is like giving the students like what they need, but not controlling what they do with that. And like the moment that he becomes the Professor X that can go on to do all of the things that Professor X does is the moment that he lets go of his, like, if you think of Mystique as his first student, he says that he raised her, which is a really weird, in a very like interestingly weird moment, not like a bad weird moment. Like Eric says to him, like, you didn't raise her, you grew up together. But he thinks of it as like he raised her and he like taught her. And so like if she's his first student, there's something there about like their relationship being the most important thing of the whole movie, and his change in that relationship being the crux of the whole film. So I don't know, he's the one who has like the early third act like breakdown of like, I can't do it.
Oh, that's true.
You know, and like has to seek wisdom from the old wise man, who is of course himself in the future. But I don't know.
Right.
I think there's a strong case for him. He's just not the person who's on screen the most.
If we say it's Charles, what does he want? This is also kind of complicated because there are two Charles.
Well, I think it's young Charles.
Now, here's something interesting. Charles is also the one who starts this. Like, Charles is the one who comes to them with the plan. Old Charles is the one who is like, we're going to send him back. We're going to stop it this way. So he is kind of... a different version of him is the impetus and the desire of this movie.
Right.
Which we've talked about this series having a real problem where the protagonists are frequently not the ones who want the thing.
Yeah, and that kind of ties into the audience surrogate thing, because he wants it to be him that goes back, as they mention. And then it ends up being Wolverine, because Wolverine's brain can be torn apart more times, apparently. But he likes, like, the movie that Professor X wants to happen is he goes back into James McAvoy's body, and then I guess just is definitively the protagonist and tries to fix the thing.
I feel like all of these movies have a Wolverine problem, and this might be why we liked First Class so much, is because he wasn't in it. Because it like solves the Wolverine problem by not having him in it, which you kind of talked about being a superhero movie trope of like the big team movie can't have the most powerful one in it. Wolverine is a character whose fundamental like power and like the basic thing about him is that he doesn't change. Like that's his whole thing is that you can do anything to him and he does not change. Like the healing ability like puts him right back. He doesn't age.
He doesn't die.
He can't die. Like all of those things are like, it's like, what did Wolverine learn in this movie? He went through, like, he's already an X-Man who cares about the team at the beginning of this movie. He doesn't have to go through that arc. He doesn't really do anything in the last act of this movie.
He just kind of learned restraint and patience. And he becomes, in a kind of lovely way, he becomes sort of, he does the thing for Professor X that Professor X did to him at the start of this franchise.
That is a really nice scene.
That is a nice moment.
Yeah. This movie does have the problem of the superhero movie where they say the most powerful character can't fight. It's not with Wolverine. It's Quicksilver.
That's true.
There's a scene where Quicksilver solves everything.
Yeah.
And what was, at the time, like, revolutionary, like, at the time, the coolest thing in the world. Still really cool.
Even though it's completely cribbed from the movie Over the Hedge.
And then Quicksilver says, well...
That's getting cut. I'm sorry.
He says, I can't be here for the rest of the plot. Gotta go.
Yeah. Gotta go play some video games.
Because there is nothing that he couldn't stop. And I would love to see him try and do it.
I honestly thought, because at the end, there's the shot of Magneto like points all the cameras at him and like gives the mutant speech, and you see Quicksilver reacting to it. And I thought, because right after that happens, everything freezes because Professor X freezes everyone. Oh. And I thought Quicksilver was about to run out.
Coming back.
That would have been so good.
Dude, it would have been so cool because then he could just snag the helmet. Done.
Yeah.
Like, like, problem solved. He doesn't even have to do anything else. He doesn't have to, like, push bullets around. All he has to do is just come grab the helmet and, like, be sitting up at the top of the football stadium.
Right.
And, like, let Professor X do his thing from there.
Let's talk about Quicksilver. Let's start with, how do you guys feel about him in this? Played by Evan Peters.
So good.
Yeah, it was good. It was cool. I liked him.
So, Quicksilver is a character in the comics who is the twin brother of Scarlet Witch, who are both the children of Magneto.
Oh, yes. I am excited to talk about this.
This was a big thing at the time. So the character of Quicksilver was considered in the legal gray area between what was owned by Fox and what was owned by Marvel Studios.
Okay.
Because the character of Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch are mutants, but they are also... in the legal argument that Marvel Studios made, more known for being Avengers than for being X-Men.
But they are the children of an X-Man.
They have done both. Exactly. Yeah. So the ruling in this, because both of the studios wanted to use him simultaneously, the ruling was that they could both use him. However, Marvel Studios couldn't use the word mutant in any of their films and couldn't have any reference to Magneto.
Yeah.
And Fox couldn't use the word Avenger. Which, like, they probably were... It seems like Marvel Studios was more likely to use mutant than Fox was to use Avenger.
Especially in this movie that takes place in 1973.
So that's how we have, in this movie, Quicksilver, and then the year later in Avengers Age of Ultron, also Quicksilver, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson.
Is that why he gets killed?
Yeah, because this was like a big thing that people were talking about, and I remember talking about it at the time, because people were like, well, how will we have two Quicksilvers? How could we possibly do that? And then we didn't have to do that.
Yes, this was the talk of the town at the time. I think that, like, when pictures of them both came out, people were like, this guy in the gray wig is not going to do it. Like, nobody believed in this Quicksilver.
Oh, yeah.
Compared to Aaron Taylor Johnson. But, like, I think his performance is really good. I think the action scene is just, like, incredible. And they don't do that in Age of Ultron. They just, like, have it from the street perspective. You see him speed back and forth.
Yeah.
Which is fun to watch, but...
let me just say, I don't remember Quicksilver in that movie or much else about that movie. Whatever the legal battle is, the X-Men deserve to have him because they just used him better.
Yeah, there's a little like side reference to Magneto being his father in this in a very funny moment where you see where they're in the elevator.
I forgot about that.
And Magneto says, I can control metal. And he says, oh, my mom knew someone like that. And then you see the realization. Or you see at least like the question mark Charlie Day mapping out going on in Fassbender's eyes. Also, when we have that little clip of him watching the news, he's got a little redheaded sister on his lap. Who could be Scarlet Witch.
Probably Scarlet Witch.
Yeah. They're not twins in this, but
yeah.
He is okay, so he is a good illustration of this movie trying to have some fun and levity, which I think is something that was like all over First Class and like nowhere in the original X-Men.
Or in the Wolverine.
Yeah, like the like dour like leather and steel of the original X-Men. And it's appropriately nowhere in that stuff. Like the 2023 stuff that is like aesthetically and
like
plot-wise a sequel to that OG trilogy is like dour and everyone's wearing the horrible leather with the stripes and everyone's sad and miserable. But then when we cut to the 70s stuff that is the First Class sequel, there's the great shot of the lava lamp and then he's in the waterbed and it's like funny from the off.
Yeah.
So I think that stuff is like, I think they do a good job of saying like what is a sequel to what. Like it feels like two movies because it is.
Right.
Yeah. What do you think the breakdown is time-wise?
I would guess, well, what's the movie, 2:15?
Yeah.
I would guess it's half an hour, 2023, both timelines. 1:45, 1973.
It feels like an hour and a half of the 2023 timeline and like 45 minutes of the 1973. Just because that stuff is so much more fun to watch.
Watching First Class, this is not what you would guess a sequel to it would be.
No.
Yeah.
I know that our buddy, God we miss him, Matthew Vaughn, was set to return to do this movie. And he was really pumped about it. He had like a quote where he was like, the first movie you got to do all the labor to set everything up, but the second one you just got to have fun. Like I'm ready to make my Dark Knight, the Batman Begins I made. And then he left to do Kingsman. Which comes out the following year, which he said was a really hard decision. But he was like, I wonder how much of it goes to his mantra that we talked about 2 weeks ago of like wanting to be the guy who comes in when the chips are down and audiences have low expectations and like not being comfortable being the guy making the highly anticipated sequel.
Oh, yeah.
Especially since critically the Kingsman sequel also isn't as beloved as the first one. So he like did some work. I know he and his writing partner Jane Goldman get a story credit on this. But I know they were not doing any of the like it was just a sequel to First Class. It was set in 1973. It was going to heavily involve the Kennedy assassination and the Vietnam War.
We got
JFK's a mutant.
JFK's a mutant.
He left. They brought Singer back, which is like clearly the thing they needed to do this whole time was not ask Singer to come back, because if you remember, every single movie since X2, it's almost like he has like a right of refusal. Like they would always come to him first for every single movie, without exception. The first person they ask is Bryan Singer. And then when he says no, they asked everyone else. And this time they were just like, it's Matthew Vaughn's movie, he's going to do it. Then he dropped out, and then Bryan Singer's like, yeah, I'll come back. Fox signed Simon Kinberg to write this movie and a film that comes out the following year, Fantastic Four. And they were so bullish about these two films that they signed him to like a multi-year contract to plot out their whole cinematic universe. And like as this came out, they also depicted the slate, which was that they were going to do, after these movies, they were going to do X-Men Apocalypse. Okay. And they dated all of these movies. X-Men Apocalypse, Fantastic Four 2, X-Men 2018, which was going to be another sequel. And then it was all going to lead to a gigantic event movie that was X-Men Fantastic Four coming together.
Oh, cool.
And that was like what they this time they were like, that's what everything's building towards. We've like got our ducks in a row. We've got the man who's going to lead the franchise, which is Simon Kinberg. And
Boy.
And that fell apart, huh?
And then, well,
Fantastic
Four comes out the next year.
Wow.
But this is the era of like every studio is trying to do the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and they all put out the dates.
Is this when we get the dark universe?
Yeah, this is where we have the dark universe, and they put out that famous picture of like Tom Cruise and Johnny Depp and Benicio del Toro all sitting in a room. Russell Crowe for all those movies that were never going to be made.
Wait, for what?
For
the dark
the dark universe, the cinematic universe that kicked off with The Mummy.
And what else?
Never had another film.
Okay.
This is where we get, which we're still getting the ends of, you know, the monster universe with Godzilla and Kong Skull Island all building up to Godzilla versus Kong. This is where DC Comics, who have just put out Man of Steel, put out this like 12-page list of how we're going to get Green Lantern Corps, and we're going to get the Cyborg movie, and we're going to get Justice League Part 1 and Part 2.
Has any of that panned?
Some of it did, but not most of it.
It became very different from what it was going to be.
But Marvel, the MCU followed through on almost all of it they put out at this time.
Yeah, and it happened because the MCU would do it. The MCU works in phases. So they, at the start of a new phase, will say, like, these are all the movies we have coming in the dates.
Yeah.
And it's always like a huge event.
Yeah.
And so since they had successfully done that, everyone else was like, we got to do it too. There is another cut of this movie. We should just briefly mention this.
Oh, yeah.
Bryan Singer's X-Men Days of Future Past
to
be released on HBO Max.
We watched the theatrical version, which is on Disney+. There is a version called the Rogue Cut, which is 20 minutes longer. I've seen it. And the big differences are in the 2023 timeline, after she gets cut, Kitty Pryde can't like continue to do it. We see like one clip of this plot line, which is where Bobby comes to the professor and he's like, she's gonna die, like we can't keep doing this. So what happens is they go and rescue Rogue, who is being held captive at the X Mansion, and Bobby dies saving her. And then Rogue goes, takes on the power of Kitty Pryde, and does the rest of the work for Kitty.
I think that's the version I watched as a kid, actually.
Yeah, that is the one time I watched that was with you. The one time I watched the cut.
Okay.
And then in the 1973 timeline, after the airport scene, Mystique comes and visits the mansion and sleeps with Beast, rekindling their romance from the previous movie, and destroys Cerebro, so that Professor X can't stop her from there, which is why they have to go in person to...
Interesting.
It helps with plot stuff and it gives you more characters. In my opinion, what you get isn't worth having to spend 20 more minutes watching the movie, but it is like interesting stuff. This film does pass the Bechdel test. It is like almost all of these films in one scene very briefly. It's the scene where Mystique and a nurse speak to each other. Yeah, it is par for the course pretty much with these movies, other than First Class, where it's like you just get it for a minute. I was also reminded that First Class set up Mystique as being defined by every single male character in her last moment on screen, where I was like, oh yeah, she's dated all of these dudes, where she's giving like sad longing looks before she limps away. I was like, oh yeah, she's got to look at the professor, then Beast, then Magneto, then walk away, because she has a romance with all of them.
Also, where the hell is Moira McTaggart?
Yeah, that's a good question.
She's a great
big part of First Class.
She's a big part of First Class and feels like a teased plot line or like future, so like some sort of future character.
Yeah, she forgets everything at the end.
Oh yeah, you're right.
She does do that, but she's still a SHIELD agent, isn't she? Or not SHIELD?
Not
sorry,
SHIELD.
that's copyrighted.
CIA. Yeah, no, she was cool. Would have liked her being in this movie.
Let's just run through the performances.
Okay.
Okay.
To see if there's any we want to talk about. We've got Hugh Jackman.
Great.
As Wolverine.
Good.
Super good.
Really good in this.
Really good.
McAvoy and Stewart, respectively.
Both great.
Also really good. It's interesting seeing both performances in this movie to me. Both with Stewart and McKellen, because both of them, their acting is just kind of like looking like cool old dudes. Like you just kind of see them and your brain assumes that they've like been through a lot of stuff. Where like when the world is ending around them, they just kind of like raise their eyebrows and look around. But when the world is ending around like James McAvoy, he like freaks out and like does a ton of stuff. And it was so interesting seeing like old dudes in costumes just kind of like being there and sort of looking regal, and then like the younger counterparts sort of freaking out, which I guess is like maybe just how getting older works.
I love the scene they get together.
Yeah.
That is kind of like the heart and soul of the movie to me.
That is really good.
I love the moment between Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart where he says
Oh,
all
yeah.
those years
Oh my god.
like fighting against each other.
If we could only have a few of them back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
the
like-
part when they right after that where they kiss and admit that they've been in love with each other was my favorite part
That
of the movie.
part, that I was really like, wow, they were really swinging for the fences there.
Yeah, they finally admitted it.
This was probably my headcanon, but there's a moment where Wolverine says to Charles when he first meets him, "I was sent back by you and Eric together." And there's a look in McAvoy's eyes which conveys to me that he is wondering if his dreams have come true or not.
Yeah, I think that like continuing on from First Class, that relationship is still very much alive between the two of them.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Like,
McAvoy
yeah.
has like so much. He's been hurt so much.
He has.
Yeah.
But
by
I think the scene,
relationship.
like the scene on the plane is so good.
Oh man,
And
we
the
get them playing
naming-
chess.
Oh,
Also.
we do get them playing
Well,
chess.
not playing chess. We get them the offer of chess
Yeah.
is made.
The plane scene is incredible.
It is.
That's why I think this movie has both performances and scenes that are like punching above its weight.
The naming of the X-Men dead is really powerful in that scene too. Like, here are the people that we've lost.
Yeah.
Which is like, it was handled differently, would feel like kind of clunky, but it just feels so like powerful. And
Yeah, because especially coming off of, I mean, this is that thing of the emotional weight comes from having seen the previous movies, but like knowing all of those as characters, like you've seen those people grow, and just sort of thinking of all of those, like they're people that are dead, they're not names that are dead.
Yeah. Fassbender in particular has less to do than in First Class. But I do think that scene really reminds you of like his whole thing, like his character's whole thing.
No, I love the just like the humor and the sass that Magneto has.
Yeah.
With like the way, like him walking in with the two marbles and using those to take down all the guards. Just the like fun little Magneto isms.
Mystique, Jennifer Lawrence. Wild to me, as we said before, that they even got her to do this movie. But I wonder if that's why she's like in it so much less than everyone else, and also is in blue makeup like much less than in the previous movie.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Okay, Zane, who is your most valuable player other than Wolverine in this movie?
James McAvoy. I'll just say him. He does a good job. It was compelling for me to see him so distraught because I saw him so optimistic in the last movie, which I watched last night or 2 nights ago, which I guess is a point towards being able to act both roles and being able to act both convincingly. So I think I'm comfortable with that decision.
Emmett?
MVP OTW is Mystique, 100%. I think she's...
Wow,
interesting.
Yeah, I like... She's...
You were a little tepid on her performance in First Class.
I was, and I love Jennifer Lawrence too. Like in general terms, especially in the Hunger Games, which is what she's the other thing that she's in, like right around this time. I like her plot in this movie. I like what she's doing. I think we didn't talk about this, but I think all the parts where it cuts to Super 8 footage.
Oh yeah,
Like,
the
all
found
of
footage
this
stuff is awesome.
like really cool, and there's a lot of her in those that's really cool. And I think like ultimately she's the one who makes the decision at the end that saves them all. She's not, I don't think she's in it enough or like does enough to be the protagonist, but she is the one who like saves everyone by deciding not to kill Trask. And she also gets to impersonate Richard Nixon, who's also in this movie that we haven't talked about. We don't really need to, but just that's awesome. She's doing Mystique things, but she's doing them better than happens in a lot of the other movies, I feel like. And for once, if she's not like a hero, she's at least like when she's in it, she's an active character doing things.
She shoots Magneto.
She shoots Magneto in the throat.
Oh, that is vicious. I forgot about
Just
that.
brutal. She stabs him in the throat, or like starts to stab him in the throat earlier.
She chokes out a man with her foot.
She does that.
Yeah.
She like has the weird seduction scene with the North Vietnamese general.
On your choice of her as your MVP, that scene of her and James McAvoy and Professor X when she's in the airport and she's like talking to all the different people, that was really cool for me.
That's such a cool scene.
It is a really cool scene.
And there's like a certain paranoia about this movie that's interesting. It's not like always there, but it's there in that scene. It's there in like the whole paranoia about like the reason behind getting the Sentinels, and like that's to go off the Nixon thing. That is like the whole thing of the Nixon presidency is about paranoia. So there's like a theme. It's not like heavy, but it's in there.
And that is what leads directly to the Sentinels.
Yeah,
it's paranoia
exactly.
about the mutants.
Yeah.
That is interesting. Wade,
Cool. Wade,
who is your
MVP
MVP
OTW?
All right. I think there are tiers to the good performances. There are 3 people in tier 1 and 3 people in tier 2, so I'm going to start with tier 2. Tier 2 is
Are there that many
Fassbender,
characters in this
who's
movie?
great in this but doesn't have a lot to do. Tier 2 is
Quicksilver?
yes, that's it.
Okay.
It's Fassbender, it's Quicksilver, and it's Kelsey Grammer for the one line as Beast. Or tier 2, and all of those guys do so good. Tier 1 is McAvoy, who would have been my pick. He was picked before, as he should be picked first for this movie. He should have won the Oscar for this movie.
Oh, are these exclusive? I didn't realize we couldn't pick other people's.
That's right. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I understand.
Then Jackman, who obviously is excluded by the thing, but I do love his performance. The third one, and my pick for MVP OTW, is Peter Dinklage, who's so great in this.
He is so cool.
He's so cool, and he's so reserved, and he gets a wide range of emotions. He has an interesting motivation that we hear in one scene. He has like interesting, like the way his plot is threaded throughout. The rest of the story is interesting for a villain, and his performance is like so caring and tender and insidious. You see like why it works.
There's also something to it of like maybe being the first villain that they don't wind up in a punching fight with.
Yeah.
In the whole
Right.
series. Or like some version of
That's
that
true.
thing.
The stadium bit is so cool.
Yeah.
And
cool.
still looks good. The 2 sequences that I remember loving, the Quicksilver scene in the stadium, both look good. There's the opening doesn't look good to me, and pulling the black box out of the White House does not look good to me.
Yeah. It is. The stadium is so cool too. I audibly exclaimed when this happened because you see him in the stadium and you're like, what is going on? Why is Magneto here? Because also he's like with the team and then he kind of goes off on his own and you don't, as the viewer, you're not tracking, you're just seeing things. And you see him lift up the stadium and you're like, whoa, this feels real, but like what's going on? And then he drops it around the White House as the border, which is insane. So
That's also a cool thing, continuing his arc from First Class of like getting more and more powerful and tapping into different sides of himself.
He is so powerful.
I also like the blink power of the portals.
so
that
cool.
stuff is really
Oh,
cool.
yeah.
And used so well.
She almost was my MVP.
Yeah.
Like she was very close. If she'd had a line, I think she could have, like, she really could have taken it. But
Yeah, those guys are
such a
pretty
cool-
much cannon fodder. But Bishop is like looks cool and does have a bunch of lines. He definitely has more lines than Storm by a large amount.
Yes.
Just give us a Storm movie. Like, forget this. Give us a Storm movie where it's about Storm. Okay, I've solved like a problem for the MCU and for the X-Men series,
Okay.
and like how you tie everything together. So we've lost Chadwick Boseman as the Black Panther. Storm is in the comics at some point
The Queen of
Wakanda,
Right.
and is married to Black Panther, but Black Panther is just whoever like holds that power, right?
Right.
Because like Chadwick Boseman's dad was the
the Black Panther.
Was the Black Panther before him?
Yes.
So we introduced a new Black Panther, who somehow tied into that line as cousin or brother or something to that character with Storm. All of a sudden, you have that movie of like a Storm Black Panther movie, and then you bring in the X-Men at the end of that movie, bring them into the MCU. Boom, done. You get a good movie for Halle Berry as Storm. You figure out how to bring in a new Black Panther in a way that isn't burying Chadwick Boseman's legacy. It's like acknowledging that instead of like trying to recast that.
Sure, yeah.
And then I don't know. I feel like there's something.
Sounds like the perfect Storm to me. Zane, any final thoughts on X-Men: Days of Future Past?
It wasn't as cool as I remembered it being.
I agree.
I think that like stood out a lot. I wouldn't call my experience of watching it disappointing necessarily, because there was lots of cool stuff, as we've discussed, like lots of isolated, really great things. But it was, I don't know, less exciting for me going back to it. I think a brief comment on the score, because we haven't talked about it. I liked the score. I thought it was cool. I thought it was less interesting than the First Class score. First Class has a lot of like cool, sort of interesting, almost rock beats in the background, in the big montage scenes. This was like all very industrial sounds, which was cool and was really effective in a lot of the parts. This also has the choir, which I don't think we get in First Class. Very briefly, in towards the end, they like start doing the choir starts like singing in the score, which was cool. Just because we don't get that all the time. But yeah, I thought it was cool. It was effective. It felt maybe more similar, I guess. And the guy who scored this scored X2, you said? Yeah, it did feel like a movie that is supporting that leather and steel aesthetic, because it is a industrial music. It is that genre. But yeah, overall, I guess final thoughts. I liked it. It was still cool. I think if you were to describe this movie to someone, like in a sentence rather than like an hour and a half podcast, if you were to describe this movie to someone, the description of it would maybe be cooler than the movie.
I've lost all. I've lost the plot on this one completely. It's hard to overstate how mind-blowing the twist was at the time.
That is true.
This is the movie that made me care about the X-Men.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because at the time, okay, so we said this movie was like critically acclaimed. On the critic side, the complaints about it for people who didn't like it was just that it was like taking on too much, which is, I think, a valid criticism. But I remember there was a lot of fan reaction where fans were like, they erased all of the movies. Like, this has been for nothing. Like, I'm upset about it. Which is interesting because my reaction now and then is like, it finally means something.
Yeah.
Like, finally, all the time I spent watching these god-awful movies is for something.
Yeah.
It's like resulted in a story that ties things together and cares.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think also, so not to overstay my welcome on final thoughts, because maybe a theme of this podcast is like, how do we interact with these movies? Like with the question of morality and Bryan Singer and just the movies in general. And I think part of why this movie is disappointing to me now is because when I first saw it, it was the first time I had kind of imagined seeing something that like comic book event-y in a movie. Like something about time travel and about multiple timelines. And like it felt like Crisis or like like a big comic book crossover event, but one that was distinctly comic booky. Like that was crazy for me. And now coming back to it, we're coming after seeing Avengers Endgame and after seeing Crisis on Infinite Earths, which is sort of similar in scope. And like we're just coming in a world that has that, like post all of those things.
Even Spider-Verse.
Yeah, Spider-Verse. Incredible movie. And I think like the thing, like that's just the way that we see this movie is also kind of the way we see the X-Men movies. Is like it's sort of set up doing that thing in a way that was cool because it did the thing. And then later other movies and mediums do the same thing, but in a way that's like objectively better. They take the premise and then kind of run with it.
Emmett, any final thoughts?
I've got a couple. Just a couple.
Okay.
The body count for this is 16, which is a markedly like smaller number than the past couple, which I think are in the 30s or 40s. And that's not even considering the fact that most of those 16 deaths are the same 5 people getting got getting got over and over again, and that all of those deaths get erased at the end. I think there's only a couple of people who actually die in this movie, and Wolverine has that awful part where the things go through him, which is like body horror to the max, dude. But
didn't like that.
So there's a thought. Other than that, I think this movie holds up like about like the others do. It's like, yeah, like cool moments, like the parts of it that I remember liking, I still like. The parts of it that I either don't remember or remember not liking, I'm still like, nah, about. There's nothing in this that is like, that I hate. So that's good. My last thought on this is kind of related, is earlier today, somebody came into the place that I work and was like...
And they said, "Hi, I'm from the future."
They said, "Hello, I've been sent by a future version of you to come and tell you not
quit
to
your job.
Quit your job. Don't do this podcast."
This podcast leads to mutant Armageddon.
It's the podcast. Am I too early? That's a Batman v Superman joke, Andy.
No, so they came in and they said, "I am 100% certain that language is a complex system made up of signs and signifiers and signified, but that those two things are like completely inseparable and do not exist outside of each other. I'm 100% certain." And I said, "Okay, interesting. But what makes you so sure?"
You are now also fired from this podcast. I am now the only one getting the check from Fox. Please exit my house.
Please exit the continuity condo now.
Your free trial of Cinema Bums has ended. Please insert $30 to continue.
Join us next week when we talk about the best movie in the X-Men franchise, Deadpool.
And then are you going to ask me if I have any final thoughts?
Wait, do you have any final thoughts?
No. Zane, thank you so much for being here. Do you have any projects you want to plug? Any place that people can find you?
Yeah, lots of stuff. Well, I make music is the thing that I do. So I have a band, Caffeine Daydream, and you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and then our music's on like Spotify and Apple Music and everything. So following us on all of those is really helpful. I have a Bandcamp, which is just zanehollomon.bandcamp.com, and that's a lot of sort of smaller solo stuff. My first record is on there, my first solo record. The music for this podcast is on there, and I am working on writing my second record, which will also be on Spotify when it comes out. But yeah, those are sort of the two major things where I put out my music. I also have just like my own personal Instagram, which I announce a lot of music and stuff I'm working on, which is a complicated handle, but you can just look up Zane Hollomon and find it. But yeah, I think those are the big places. Following me and my band helps a ton, and just like whatever music I have out at the time.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well, Emmett, we've now reached the halfway mark in this series. This is film 7 of 13.
Mm-hmm.
I also want to note that this franchise lasted 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
The first 7 films in it come out across 14 years, and the next 6 films come out across 4 years.
Okay.
Because
Oh, wow.
the next one isn't until 2016. No film in 2015. But next week we'll be back talking about Deadpool. Very excited about that. And Happy New Year, everyone. I hope you have an excellent year.
Stay frosted.
Cinema Bums is a production of DKG Podcasts. It is created and produced by Emma Temple and me, Wade Lawrence Hollomon. I also edit and mix the podcast. Our theme music is by Zane Hollomon, who you can find on Bandcamp, and our show art is by Autumn Beckner. Our social media is managed by Laura Bennett. If you like what you hear, please tell all your friends, and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, the 2 best ways to spread the word about our work. You can also follow us on Instagram @CinemaBums, or email us at cinemabumspod@gmail.com. Don't flake on us. We'll be back next week.